Hi, this is Josh Daum, Office Administrator for the Presbytery of the Western Reserve, and this is the next in a series of videos on using Zoom for video conferencing. In this video, we're going to cover some of the in-meeting controls. So let's get started. All right, so the first thing I want to call your attention to as we enter the meeting here, typically you would have scheduled a meeting and entered it with a Zoom link or from your dashboard here. If you had scheduled a meeting that was occurring today, it would show up here where it says no upcoming meetings today. For the purposes of this demonstration, I'm just going to click New Meeting. Now, you're going to notice a couple of things as the window opens. First is that we're going to get a second window that tells us we have a couple of options about the audio conference. This is how your sound is going to be transmitted to the other folks in the meeting. I mentioned in the video on setting up Zoom meetings that you have a couple of choices, one of which is to call in on the phone. This I think of as a pretty much a fallback option for folks who are having difficulty with their computers, or maybe they don't have a microphone plugged in and are otherwise unable to use the computer audio. For the vast majority of participants, they're going to use computer audio, so that's what we're going to do here. Click computer audio, and then click join with computer audio. And then it tells us we are using the computer audio. Now you'll notice that I've got a window open here, which is the Zoom call. The next thing I want to call your attention to is the fact that there's no video. I'm using a different piece of software to record this video right now, and Zoom is sort of competing for the webcam, and it doesn't really like that. If I were to try to start video right now, we'd get an error message, and I don't really want to subject you to that. So instead, we have just a still picture of me. That's my profile picture. But you'll notice that there's a window here, and in the background, we've still got the rest of the Zoom desktop client. And in the upper right-hand corner of the Zoom meeting window, we have this button here that says Enter Full Screen. And that does exactly what it sounds like. Now you'll notice that the Zoom meeting takes up the entirety of the screen. I like this because I can be a little bit distractible at times, and if I've got a lot of chaotic things going on in the background, my email's up and a new message pops in, it might distract me from the meeting. Similarly, you can exit full screen, but for this demonstration, we're going to go with full screen mode. Okay, so I'm going to leave my mouse stationary for just a moment so that I can show you, so you can see that the meeting controls have already gone away. And what happens is when you move the mouse, the meeting controls come back. All right, so I'm going to start with these first two controls on the left here, mute, and this one says start video. Like I mentioned before, the software I'm using to record this video is currently using the webcam, and so Zoom is unable to use it. But if I weren't recording, and if Zoom were using the webcam, this might already be on, and I would have a button that said stop video. And then if I clicked it, I'd get this slash through it like you see now. Actually, let me demonstrate that with the microphone. So if I click on the microphone, you can see the green is bobbing up and down as I'm talking there. That's because it's showing me the audio levels. If I click that, and that mutes the microphone. I wasn't saying anything, don't worry. Uh, but that's how you turn your microphone on and off. Maybe your kids have barged into the room and they brought the dog in tow and it's about to get very loud and you don't want to disrupt the meeting. You might turn your microphone off for a moment. Similarly with the video, you can turn it on and off. And then on the right of each of those, we've got these little up arrows that give us some settings and options. Mostly you're not going to need to mess with those unless you're having difficulty with, for example, your microphone. Maybe you have a USB microphone plugged in as well as a pair of headphones and the computer's confused about which one it's supposed to be listening to. You can select that here. You can select your speaker output. In most cases, you're not going to have a whole lot in the way of options there. And similarly with the video, we've got some video settings. There's some cool stuff you can do with virtual backgrounds. I encourage you to play around with that. It's by no means a necessary thing that you need to do, but it can be quite fun. So those are the mute and start video controls. All right, so next up, I want to talk about the invite button. I spoke a little bit about inviting folks to Zoom meetings in the previous video where we went over how to schedule a Zoom meeting using the web client. This is a similar thing. So I'm going to click on invite here and I want to demonstrate a couple of things. So you'll notice right off you've got default email, Gmail, and Yahoo Mail. That's because this is set up to open any one of those clients. Maybe you use Outlook or Thunderbird or some other, Mac Mail, some other email client. It will use whatever the default your system is set to. You can also use Gmail. That's the one I use. So actually, I want to click that and show you. So what it's going to do is it's going to open up a new email in Gmail. And in that, you're going to see all of the invitation info, which is going to look very similar to what we went over in the previous video about how to set up a Zoom meeting. And I went over also some tips about how to edit this down so it's not quite so chaotic to look at. Zoom is used by all kinds of organizations all over the world, and it's set up so that people can Zoom in from different coasts and different countries and all be on the same meeting together. That's not really how we use it in the Presbytery. We're typically just hosting committee meetings in Zoom, and people might be coming in from Westlake and Parma and Cleveland or whatever, not necessarily Houston and San Jose. So I typically edit a lot of this down. I'm not going to go over that again. If you're interested in some tips about how to make this a little easier to digest and less chaotic to look at, you can check out our video on scheduling Zoom meetings. But the point of all this is that it opened this email for me. I can do whatever I need to do with this text here. I can send it to whomever I need to send it, and then we'll be good to go. So I want to show you another thing. I'm just going to delete everything in this email because I want to show you another feature that Zoom offers us when inviting people. So I'm going to click invite again, and you'll see down here it says copy URL. Okay, so I'm just going to click that, and then I'm going to go back over to my email so I can show you what that did. Oops. So I'm going to paste that into here, and you'll notice that is just the URL. If you've used Zoom before, you've seen things that looked like this quite a lot. And actually, it's in there. It's in that full meeting invitation. It's exactly the same URL, but this is just for people who don't need all that extra text, who definitely aren't going to join by phone, who maybe are veterans to Zoom and very familiar with the process. So you can copy just the URL. That's a thing you can do. Going back over to Zoom, you can also copy the entirety of the invitation. And this does basically what Zoom did before when we created the entire email, is it just copies it onto the clipboard, which I can then paste wherever I need it. Now, pasting it into this email is sort of silly because we can just have Zoom open the email for us. But if I were creating a Google Calendar event or another shared calendar and I wanted to paste this into the description, that would be a really helpful way to do it. I could copy all this onto the clipboard, go over to, why don't I show you? Go over to Google Calendar, create a new event, come on. And in the description of the event, I could paste the entirety of that information and edit it down, do whatever I need to do with it. And I could add my title. This isn't exactly a tutorial on using Google Calendar, but it's sufficient to say that this is going to be the same pretty much regardless of what calendar platform you're using. You're going to have a title, you're going to have a date and time, you're going to have a description, details. So that's another way you can use that. So why don't we don't need to save that. Okay. So that is a couple of ways that you can invite folks. You can also invite by contacts. I believe I've mentioned in a previous video, we're actually using Zoom Phone at the Presbytery office now, which is pretty cool to have all of our communications sort of unified on one platform like that. But if you do use Zoom for other things and you manage all of your contacts through Zoom, you can click over to invite by contacts, and you can click on the individual users that you want to invite to a meeting. And so that is the invite control in the in-meeting controls. Next, I want to talk a little about the Manage Participants button. So this is actually going to be a pretty boring section because I am the only participant in this meeting. So you'll notice this came up as a window. A lot of times it will come up more like a sidebar, so I'm going to reposition and resize this just to sort of show you a little more like what it might look like when you bring up the participants window in your own Zoom meeting. Regardless if it's a window or if it's a sidebar, you will have a list of participants here, and you will also have, you can see the green on my microphone is bobbing up and down because I'm speaking. You can see that the slash is through the video camera icon because my camera is off. So you'll be able to look at your list of participants and see whether their microphones are working, whether or not they're speaking, whether their microphones are turned on and off, their video is turned on and off, etc. And this can be helpful, helping folks diagnose and troubleshoot audio problems. If somebody is speaking and you can't hear them, you could open your participants panel and see real quick, oh, right, oh, of course we can't see Josh's face because his video is turned off, for example, all right? Down at the bottom here, you've got controls that say mute all, unmute all, and more. Mute all and unmute all do exactly what you might think. They mute everybody, they unmute everybody. More gives you some control over muting and unmuting, and we'll talk about lock meeting in a moment. But you could set this to mute everybody at the moment they join the meeting. They will still be able to unmute themselves as long as they are allowed to based on this permission. You can check or uncheck that. This gives you more control over your meeting. There are a variety of reasons to use Zoom, and committee meetings are only one of them. So if you were doing a presentation that wasn't going to require a lot of interaction or feedback, you might want to mute all of your participants and not allow them to unmute themselves. You could then selectively unmute people if you needed to, or maybe you're just speaking and you just need them to listen. So this gives you some control over that. Lock meeting prevents other folks from joining the meeting while it is in progress. Play chime for enter or exit does exactly what it sounds like. We can close that window here, and that is the Manage Participants control. All right, the next control I would like to show you is the Share control. Now, I could probably do an entire video on screen sharing in Zoom, and maybe in the future I will, but for now I just want to show you a couple of basics. So I'm going to go ahead and click Share, and what you're going to see is a window that includes lots of different things that I have open, including that Zoom reservation, email that I showed you in the previous video, and some other things, the software that I have recording. So what this will show you is all of the windows that you have open, basically all of the options you have for sharing your screen on a Zoom meeting. So first I want to show you the whiteboard. And if you've met in the Presbytery office or in the conference room, you may have noticed that giant, I hope you've noticed that giant 4-foot by 8-foot whiteboard we have on one wall, which is one of the really nice things about that space. Well, the great thing about Zoom is it gives us sort of a digital version of that whiteboard, which has all kinds of different tools, text entry, in case you have bad handwriting. You can, of course, draw. You can change the color. Basically anything you could do. Actually, you can't even type on a physical whiteboard. So this actually gives you a little bit more functionality. We can erase items. There's all sorts of stuff you can do here, and check. You can also save this image to your computer if this was something, if you generated something as a group that you wanted to be able to refer back to. You could save it as an image file and look at it later. And we can, of course, clear the whiteboard. So that's one of the options for screen sharing. So I'm going to click, and you'll notice that while you're in Share, you've got this little icon here, or this little menu here. This shows you, if you hover over it, it gives you the in-meeting controls. And on the left here, we've got the meeting ID. And on the right here, we have a button that says Stop Share, which does what it sounds like. I'm going to click that now, and we're going to go back to the meeting window proper. So I'm going to click on Share again because I want to show you another option that you've got. So you'll see here, this is my email client because I've got the Gmail logo down there on the bottom. Here's Chrome. So I'm going to click over to Chrome. It does happen to be open to Gmail right now, but I want to click back over here to this window so that I can show you. This is just the Presbytery website. And this could be any website. I could bring up Google. I could bring up a document. I could bring up pretty much anything in here. Anything that I needed as presentation material during the meeting. similarly to how you might use a screen on the wall or a flip chart, you know, a printout of a document, etc. These are ways we can share meeting materials within the Zoom meeting. All right, so I'm going to go back up to stop share here, and I'm going to click back into the share window one more time. I don't have it open right now, but if I had, say, Microsoft Word open, or if I had a PowerPoint open, that would show up here as well, and I could click over to that and share that with the meeting. Basically, anything you need to share as a presentation material, you will pretty much be able to in a Zoom meeting. There are even some more advanced options here. You can see iPhone, iPad. You can use AirPlay with an iOS device to use your iPhone or iPad as a second screen to share meeting materials. And I encourage you to play around with that. I'm going to close out of this. Now to the right of share, we've got this little up arrow, and that gives you settings similarly to the other up arrows. Now I'm the host of this meeting, which means I have some more control, similar to the manage participants window. I have some more control over these sharing options than other participants won't. So the default setting is that one participant can share at a time. So for example, if somebody else was sharing and I tried to share, I would get a little notification that says only one person's allowed to share at a time. We can set it up so that multiple participants can share simultaneously. And what sharing effectively does in that case is it replaces your video feed with whatever you're sharing. Now, under advanced sharing options, we have some even more granular controls over who can share and how and when. We can set it so that only the host can share, or that all participants can share, but maybe we want to uh, set it up so that only the host can start sharing when someone else is sharing. These are very specific controls that allow you a lot of specificity in terms of who can share and when. Maybe you're not going to need all of that functionality, but it's good to know that it's there. So that's a quick summary of the share function within the Zoom meeting controls. The next control I'd like to show you is the chat button. Now, if you've used Facebook Messenger or Google Chat, or even just texting, this is very similar to that. You'll notice it opened up as a window. A lot of times it will open up as a sidebar. Regardless, it works the same way both times, but I'm gonna enlarge it over here and arrange it like it's a sidebar, because that is typically how it opens. So you will notice that similar to the Manage Participants button, this is a pretty boring segment because I'm the only person in this meeting. But you know, if there were other folks in this meeting, I could type a message to them. And when I'm talking about Zoom, I frequently will speak in terms of digital equivalents of things. In the previous section of this video, I talked about the digital equivalent of a whiteboard. A Zoom call itself is the digital equivalent of us sitting around a conference table and meeting together. I think of this as the digital equivalent of whispering to your neighbor during a meeting, which, I mean, I've done it. I'm sure we've all done that, right? So this is sort of the digital equivalent of that. And it actually can be a really useful communication tool if you don't want to disrupt the meeting, if you've just got a quick question that you think somebody else is going to be able to answer, but you don't want to interrupt the presenter. This becomes even more useful when you have lots and lots and lots of participants in a meeting. In the past, when the Presbytery Office has used Zoom, it has been for meetings of committees, typically somewhere between 6 and 15 people, which is not a very large meeting by most standards. As the COVID-19 crisis develops, we have congregations who are starting to consider using Zoom to gather for worship. And of course, those gatherings are going to be much larger. And so something like this that allows you to type a message to folks would be very useful for people to be able to communicate prayer requests, maybe pass the peace, things like that, without interrupting the presenter or interrupting the flow of worship. I also mentioned under Manage Participants that people's microphones could be muted remotely. Just imagine you have a worship service that has 100 people that are joining in via Zoom, and 16 of them have pets making noise in the background, and 12 more have people cooking breakfast in the background and whatnot. That could get pretty noisy pretty fast. So you might want to mute all your participants, not allow them to unmute, but that doesn't mean they won't be able to communicate. They could use the chat client to send messages around. And if there were other folks in the meeting, I could select a subset of them or one person in particular. But the default is to message everyone. And then up here, I can close that. And that is the chat function within the Zoom meeting controls. The next button on our toolbar here is the record button, and that does exactly what it sounds like. Now, there are a variety of reasons you might want to record a Zoom conference. Maybe it is a webinar that you want to make available to people later. Maybe it's an interview and you want to be able to go back and refer to it. Maybe some folks weren't able to be in the meeting even by Zoom during the time that the meeting was going on, and you'd like them to be able to watch and listen to the meeting later. You can record the meeting and it will run the entire time the meeting is going, and then when you end the meeting, it will save that as a video file that you can do what you need to do with it. You can post it on YouTube or put it up on your website or however you need to distribute that. I'm not going to click record right now because I'm already recording using a different piece of software, and I suspect that it would be a little bit taxing on my computer's processor. The final in-meeting control I would like to show you is, I think, a pretty logical stopping point. This is the end meeting button, and it does what it sounds like it does. So I'm going to click that to show you what comes up. Now, if you are the host of the meeting, when you click that, you will have the option of ending the meeting for everyone, leaving the meeting, or hitting cancel because, oops, I didn't mean to click end meeting. If I were just a participant, if I were not the host, I would just have leave meeting and cancel. As the host, end meeting for all, leave meeting. This is an important distinction because there might be a situation where you called and scheduled a Zoom meeting. You were in the middle of a meeting and you're called away suddenly. You have to deal with something else. You can then leave the meeting, but you can leave it running. You don't have to end the meeting for everyone. That's another one of the things that we really like about Zoom is that you don't actually have to have a host in the meeting to run the meeting. Now, it says here to keep this meeting running, please assign a host before you click leave meeting. I can't demonstrate that because. So that's just a basic overview of the Zoom in-meeting controls. There's only so much we can cover in a short video like this, and Zoom is really packed with a lot of features. So I encourage you to sort of get in and play around with it. When I'm learning a piece of software that I've never used before, I've really found that that's the best way to get familiar with all of its features. The thing that's great about Zoom is you can just start a meeting anytime with just you in it and play around with the controls as much as you need to familiarize yourself with them. There are a few things that you won't be able to do without other participants in the meeting, but you'll learn a good part of the controls just on your own, just sort of messing around with it. I would encourage you to be bold when you're doing this because it's very unlikely that you're going to break anything. That can be something that's a little intimidating to folks who are learning software sometimes, so I want to give you permission to just get in and see what you can find. Maybe you'll find a feature that I don't know about. Be sure to let me know if you do. Thanks for watching.